Hi there boys and girls, Brucey here, and today I'm going to be talking about a strategy for you in regards to buying gear. Now this is something I talk about a lot with my students because my students are really enthusiastic about gear, as I think most people are, and probably most people watching this channel are. That's why you're kind of watching it, and myself too. I love gear. I'm very, as you can see, I love gear and I'm very enthusiastic about gear. Now, students always coming to me asking me, should I get this, should I get that, what do you think on this and what do you think on that? And part of what I'm going to tell you goes back to when I first started out my career in the 90s, working in music retail and working in a shop selling studio equipment, high-end studio equipment, guitars and amps, sadly no longer there. But this was a pretty major shop in London on Charing Cross Road, for anyone who wants to have a guess and put it in the comments, see if you're right. And there is this saying about buy right, buy once, where you put a lot of effort and you put a lot of thought into buying something and probably spend maybe a little bit more money on it, but not always. You end up buying something which will last you a lot longer. And I get this feeling that now, although this was kind of true back then, that there is so much new stuff, there is so much amazing gear out there. We're just constantly buying gear, particularly gear that is maybe a little bit cheaper because we can probably justify it a little bit more. I'll give you a classic example. The example comes to something like plugins, and we'll use an example of waves. For example, my top tip is never pay more than $29 for a wave plugin, because they always go on sale at $29, and you can always, if you wait a little bit longer, you'll always get that plug-in at $29. And the thing is, $29 is a kind of, again, I'm not speaking out of turn here, but it's relatively cheap. Most of us can probably afford that. I appreciate in other places in the world where money isn't, that could be seen as, a lot of considerable amount of money, but in the kind of Western world it's not too much money. So we'll buy a plugin for $29 and we'll put it in there, and we may or may not use it, and then we'll look for something else and we'll buy another plugin, and then we'll buy another plugin, and we have a whole collection of plugins that maybe we don't use, or a whole collection of guitar pedals and a whole collection of things which are on the cheaper end of the scale because it's kind of disposable. We've got a little bit of disposable income, and it's a great thing. It's the excitement we get, it's consumerism. We like to buy and it's exciting, and you get a box turn up. But the strategy that I'm trying to discuss here is, maybe you can kind of guess where we're going with this, is if you start to add up all those $29 or all those £50 you've spent on guitar pedals, you've maybe got 10 overdrive pedals in the £50, that's £500. What could you have bought for that? And I think as humans we have this weird accumulation thing where we want to keep accumulating things, and we look at things like an amplifier maybe and you go, that's, it's £1,000, but there is another amplifier that's £300. You go online and you spend a lot of time, you ask people like me, you come on and you go and look at reviews and you see this stuff and you go, or maybe I'll plump for the £300 amplifier rather than the £1,000 amplifier, which kind of is maybe the thing that I really want. And you buy the £300 amplifier and maybe it doesn't live up to expectation. So you buy another one and maybe you have two amplifiers. So again, we're up to maybe £600 or £700 there. And then you buy something else because you've not fully achieved the thing that you actually wanted. And when you add it all up and you start adding it all up, you realize that maybe you've spent more than you would have spent by buying what you wanted in the first place, both in terms of the amount of time you spent researching and the amount of small amounts of cash. And again, this is something I see a lot with students, buying cheap plugins. And don't get me wrong, there are a lot of great cheap plugins out there, but you've bought 10 different compressors at $29 or $30, whatever. That's £300. Actually, you could probably buy a great emulation of an actual hardware compressor. And I'm not arguing, I do loads and loads and loads of mixes inside the box. but because it's easier and it's quicker, and there's 100 reasons why you might do it. But I think if you are aspiring to have something outside of the box or have a piece of gear, then keep aspiring for that gear rather than buying lots and lots of small bits of gear which you ultimately then throw away or just never use, and they sit in a drawer, or they sit in your plugins folder, or they sit in your virtual instruments folder. You know, buy wise, buy something once and use the hell out of it. Because again, not saying the old days were better, but I'm just giving you an example. Back in the day, you know, you'd save up and you'd buy a piece of gear, and I remember pieces of gear that I, you know, bought that once you got it, that's all you had. And you used it till its extremes. You found out everything about it. You turned everything to extremes. You tried it and you used it on everything. And as a result, you have a real connection with that piece of gear. And it helps you move up to the next level as well, because you know what you want. You know what features are missing, and you know what you're trying to achieve. Or at least you can ask someone, go, I've got this and I want to try and achieve this, and I can't quite achieve it with this. And you can step up to the next level or step sideways to the most relevant level. Whereas if you just keep buying plugins and keep buying bits of gear hoping it's going to take you to the next level, and you never, you know, you play with it for 5 minutes and you never really dig in deep and find out what it can do, and then you're lured by the next thing. This is really not a good strategy for a career or building a studio. So this is my strategy. You know, think long and hard. If you are spending out money buying lots and lots of cheaper plugins, or just buying lots of plugins, maybe every time you see a Waves offer come up or something along those lines, put that money aside for the time being. Put it into a jar. Do that for 6 months and see how much is in the jar after 6 months. And then use that to invest in a piece of gear. And it could be just the plugin that you were planning to buy, and then you've got to wait for the next sale, but it will come. Or buy a piece of hardware, outboard hardware. You've got tactile control, and I think tactile control is coming back. I think more and more people are realizing that, you know, turning things and being physically engaged with something, even if it's still working digitally, is a much better approach. So that is my buying strategy for you. You know, don't be impulsive. Just think things through, and maybe, you know, looking at all these $29, because I bet you if you start adding them all up, you realize that you've spent quite a lot of money, and ultimately you could have bought a very sexy piece of outboard, or even a very, very amazing plugin, or a very, very amazing amplifier, whatever your goal is. You know, maybe you could argue for me, you know, you've got lots and lots of cheap guitars, because you keep going, oh, I can spend £150 on a guitar, £300 on a guitar. When you add it all up, you probably could have bought a Fender Custom Shop, you know, which would be your guitar that you'd probably play to death, whereas opposed to maybe you've got 2 or 3 guitars, 4 guitars sitting around that you're not using. Love to hear your thoughts on this. I've been Brucey, and I will catch you later.